This video will help you understand whether or not your 2024 required minimum distribution will be waived. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Dime. I'm a financial planner out of Edmonds, Washington, and I specialize in working with folks to and through retirement. The IRS for the fourth year in a row has waived required minimum distributions for a select group of retirement account beneficiaries. Specifically, those are non-eligible designated beneficiaries who inherited their retirement account after the decedent met their required beginning date. If all that made sense to you, then you do not have to watch any more of this video, but if you're confused at some of the terminology, let's jump in. So back in 2019, the Trump administration implemented the Secure Act 1.0, and among a number of other changes to the tax code, one most notable change was the change in how retirement account beneficiaries are labeled and classified. Specifically, they're classified now into three categories: eligible designated beneficiaries, non-eligible designated beneficiaries, and then non-designated beneficiaries. Now, if your loved one passed away in 2019 or earlier, then these new rules do not apply to your situation. However, if your loved one passed away in 2020 or later, then you are going to want to know how these rules factor into your situation. And you're categorized as one of the three aforementioned beneficiaries. For a quick definition and for more nuance, I'll link above to a specific video on each definition. Eligible designated beneficiaries, those are going to be the surviving spouses of the decedent. And a few other smaller categories, namely those who are chronically ill or labeled disabled, those who are not more than 10 years younger than the decedent, whether or not they're family, and the minor children of the decedent. Those are all considered eligible designated beneficiaries, and they've got their own rules. This RMD waiver does not apply to them. Non-eligible designated beneficiaries, on the other hand, that's everybody else that's considered a human being. So a simple definition for those folks is if you're not an eligible designated beneficiary, then you are a non-eligible designated beneficiary. The last category of non-designated beneficiaries, those are going to be beneficiaries that are not considered human beings, aka trusts, charities, etc. Now, for a quick nuance on that though, just because a trust is labeled as the beneficiary of a retirement account does not necessarily mean that you need to treat that account as a non-designated beneficiary. Specifically for pass-through trust and things like that, you can watch my previous video on some more examples as to how that nuance plays out. Specifically though, for this video, we're talking about non-eligible designated beneficiaries and those beneficiaries who inherited the retirement account after the decedent started taking out required minimum distributions, or was at least supposed to start taking out required minimum distributions. Now, why does any of this matter? Ultimately, figuring out which beneficiary you're classified as will dictate what your options are for choosing to take out distributions from the retirement account or choosing not to take out money from the retirement account. And of course, lastly, determining whether or not you even have a choice in taking out required minimum distributions. For a quick definition of required minimum distributions, those are the mandatory retirement account withdrawals you must make from your pre-tax retirement accounts, whether it's your own pre-tax retirement account or it's an inherited retirement account. For non-eligible designated beneficiaries, whether or not the decedent had started to take out their required minimum distributions or not, you'll fall into the 10-year rule. And the 10-year rule, simply defined, means after the 10th year following the year in which the decedent passed away, you'll need to have liquidated the entire account. So by December 31st, in the 10th year following the date of death, you'll have to have that account balance reach zero. For further nuance, however, and the genesis for this video, for those of you who inherited a retirement account, you're considered a non-eligible designated beneficiary, and the decedent had started taking out required minimum distributions, also known as meeting their required beginning date, you of course have to follow the 10-year rule. But in addition to having the account balance reach zero on December 31st of the 10th year following the date of death, you also need to take out a required minimum distribution for every single year in years 1 through 9, and then of course in year 10, liquidate the entire account. Now, you can accelerate distributions, but you can't go any slower than a required minimum distribution in years 1 through 9. Now, you might be thinking, wow, that's a very specific demographic. And you're right. You might also be thinking, wow, that's a lot of nuance and literature to wade through to figure out whether or not I need to take out a required minimum distribution or not. And you're also right. And the IRS has recognized that this is a problem not only for consumers, but also for professionals who might not have mastery over this situation. And since that's been the case, the IRS has essentially waived required minimum distributions for non-eligible designated beneficiaries who needed to start taking out required minimum distributions of their own in years 1 through 9. And they've done that for the past 3 years. And this is the 4th year in a row. Now, while RMDs are waived for this demographic, it may or may not actually still be in your best interest to take out a distribution. Now, of course, this waiver will save a lot of people from a missed required minimum distribution, given how confusing all these rules are. And that missed required minimum distribution would normally have come with a 25% penalty tax on the undistributed amount of the required minimum distribution. And then when they take the money out, they have to pay income taxes as well. So with this waiver, that's nice because it now gives you the option. Do I want to take out the required minimum distribution or more or less, or do I want to take out nothing at all? Now, even if theoretically you could delay required minimum distributions all the way until the 10th year, it probably won't be in your best interest to wait until then and then do a full liquidation. And that's because federal income taxes are on a marginal basis. What that means is if you have a lot of income, a larger portion of that income might be subject to an even higher tax rate than you're used to paying. So said another way, I'd rather make 100 grand every year for 10 years rather than $1 million in 1 year. From a tax perspective, it's far more efficient to layer things out, and that's the same way with taking out distributions from a pre-tax retirement account. In addition, starting in 2026, barring any changes in the Biden administration's tax proposals, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that lowered federal income taxes for 99% of people out there will revert back to the original system before the Trump administration, starting in the tax year of 2026. That means in 2026 moving forward, again, barring any changes, everyone is going to see a higher income tax rate for the most part on the same dollar of income. So there might also be some efficacy into pulling money out of the pre-tax retirement account in 2024 and 2025 before those new tax rates kick in, which are really just the old tax rates coming back. In addition, if you're pulling out Social Security and you have to pull out a required minimum distribution from an inherited retirement account, there might also be a concern that a higher percentage of your Social Security paycheck will be included in your taxable income. And that's called a provisional income calculation. It basically just means if you make a lot more income in retirement, a larger portion of your Social Security check will be considered taxable income, and you will then have to pay more in taxes on your Social Security income. So you may or may not, again, want to delay the required minimum distributions because it could play a role in your taxability of your Social Security income. In addition, if you're 63 or older, now you have to be starting to worry about income-related monthly adjustment amount. We'll do a video in the future and breaking this down a little bit further, but to keep it simple, the more money you make at age 63 and beyond will dictate whether or not you get to pay more for Medicare Part B, and you file for Medicare at 65 and older for the most part, and the IRMA brackets have a 2-year look back. So starting when you're 63, if you're pulling out a lot more income than you were at 62 or 61, you might now end up paying more for Medicare than everybody else. And of course, that's not even to mention how combining maybe your own required minimum distributions from your own retirement account could play a role if you have to take out those distributions and take out money from an inherited retirement account. Those two buckets combined could equal a lot of taxable income, means a lot of taxes. Basically, it makes a lot of sense to proactively think about which buckets you're going to be pulling from because they're all kind of intertwined and a lot of this stuff could come to a head when you're older. So from a calls to action standpoint, of course, if you're in this demographic, congratulations, RMDs have been waived this year. But as I mentioned before, you may or may not want to capitalize on that waiver. You might still want to take out a distribution. Of course, if you know any loved ones who recently inherited a retirement account, it might make some sense to check in with those folks and make them even aware that they might have required minimum distributions. And if they do, luckily 2024 is waived, but again, it might not be in their best interest to capitalize on that waiver. The biggest call to action is just to be aware of how these various buckets and scenarios could play a role in your situation and proactively come up with a plan being mindful of income taxes rather than reactively planning when you're told by your tax professional you have to take out this distribution. It makes a lot more sense to plan ahead of time because ultimately it means you save more in taxes. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have further questions, drop them in the comments below or get in touch with the website. We'll get you squared away. Have an awesome rest of your week. We'll talk to you later. Bye.